Hey man, what's going on? So today I want to talk about something that's sapping your masculinity, killing your sex life, ruining your performance in the bed, and might actually be leading you into a depression. It's the big P word. It's I'll just call it corn for now, corn on the cob, but y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say the word because of the algorithm, but it's something that's serious. If you're watching this stuff really at all, it's actually changing the way your entire brain operates, and it's rewiring all your neural pathways in ways that are essentially kept in a juvenile state, kept in a very non-masculine state. And it all relates down to dopamine floods. See, when you're watching corn, your brain is dropping huge amounts of dopamine. I know what I'm talking about here. My first degree was in developmental psychology. So when you're watching this stuff, you're getting aroused and your brain starts dumping huge amounts of dopamine, just like if you were with a real woman in real life. It's really no different as far as your brain's concerned, except your neural pathways are getting formed and getting that dropped due to just being entertained, not being touched, not actually touching and pleasing another woman, but just by seeing that your visual stimulation is just getting filled up. And eventually that actually starts building neurons, neural pathways within your own brain. Your brain doesn't just stop growing at some magical point in life when you hit 18 or 21. It keeps growing as you do experiences. This is the reason why if you learn an instrument, it's a lot easier to learn another instrument, because those neural pathways are already there. You've built up the physical parts of your brain that actually need to learn that experience. And when you're watching that stuff, it's the same exact thing happens. Your brain physically builds up those pathways over and over again, being rewarded every time you watch it, every time you do your thing. It's getting a huge reward release of dopamine. And with that comes the addictive stuff, just like with drugs. When people get hooked on heroin, a lot of what that addictive principles are that are actually keeping them on it. When you're smoking cigarettes, the nicotine rush that actually keeps you on it is the dopamine rush that comes with it. It's the fact when you do it, you get this huge physical and mental rush through your head that feels good, and it makes your brain want it more and more and more. And the same thing happens when you're watching that. And in reality, that constant rush of dopamine leads to a lot bigger effects. Picking up the old people behind me. But that constant rush of dopamine, it actually, just like in depressive symptoms, when people say they have chemical imbalances, their serotonins aren't working right, they got low dopamine, that happens to you because you used it all up, because you're dumping it every chance you can on some artificial stimulus that's just getting you aroused without actually having the physical experience to go with it. And that kills your masculinity. It saps your testosterone in the long term, because instead of actually experiencing a physical in the present sensation with a woman, you're simply going into your own mind. You're just involved in a fantasy world, rocking your jollies out, whatever fetish you can look up to get off to. And with that, once you start dumping dopamine enough, it actually becomes more of a depression, and it can lead to real depression. There's men actually committing suicide because they started watching porn early in life, and that started resetting the parts of their brain, rewiring it, and eventually they got to where the dopamine rushes don't do it anymore, and your standard dopamine levels throughout the day drop, and then you're in a depressive state. You get depressed, you get on SSRIs that don't do anything because your problem's not with serotonin, it's with dopamine, and eventually you commit suicide. This is something that's happening every day, man, and it's something you can avoid. You know, I read just this last weekend that the #1 Google term for married men is, how do I get my wife to have sex with me? And that really hit me as something odd. It really did. I guess I learned that my wife and I have a very active life, but it's kind of like, men, you want to know why? Part of it if you're watching this stuff, that's probably the biggest reason why. Because that's keeping you beta-tized, that's keeping you in a fantasy state. Instead of looking and lusting after her to where she can feel that lust, she can see it, you're looking and lusting after a fantasy. You're looking and lusting after some other woman and some other act. And instead of building her sexuality up in a way that makes her want you, you're tearing it down. You're degrading it. Instead, you're in a sense telling her she's not good enough. But this other fantasy woman is. But your own self is. And that's huge. That kills a woman's sex drive worse than anything. So men, y'all want to start doing it more? You don't got to be looking up how to have sex with my wife. You don't got to be looking up the old corn stash, trying to rock your jollies by yourself. What you need to do is give that stuff up and let your brain have an actual hardwired reset. And it will. It'll take some time. The first few weeks you'll want it a lot, but eventually you'll start realizing that as those neural pathways develop because of those experiences, they can redevelop from you experiencing something else. You can commit to not watching that, and those same neural pathways that build up and strengthen themselves over experience after experience of watching that stuff will actually begin strengthening themselves into keeping you away from it, into keeping your mind focused on something more productive. And from there you start driving yourself forward. From there you start being the man that your woman's actually attracted to and wants to be with, instead of being the man that your woman's jealous of because you're stuck in a fantasy. From there you start actually getting your dopamine back. You start getting your natural mind's abilities back to lust after real women and to experience real women and to go for them and to interact with them. And from there, it's up to you, my man. Go get yourself a beauty queen.